the privilege of doing something slightly different. We're going to have our webinar conversation style. So we'll have an interaction because we have a small group. And so this gives us a chance to sort of get to know everyone a little bit better. And yet at the same time, get to know the speakers and sharing a bit more. I want to remind everyone to sort of right-click your screen to rename your profile to your name and your organization that you represent so that we sort of know who you are and what you do. We also want to ask you to keep your mics mute for those of you who are not speaking and only when you unmute themselves when you are asking a question. We would like you to sort of post your questions in the chat group. So for those of you who are first time in the Zoom chat, on the panel at the bottom, there is a navigation bar. Roll over it, click on the chat button, it pops up and you can sort of anchor it or you can cast it aside. But you can use that as a way for you to draft your questions that you want to pose. Now, we're not going to read it out for you, but we hope that you can sort of frame the question so that it gives us a little bit of insight what you're asking first. So we get our speakers prepared in advance a little bit of what you want to answer. And then, of course, we'll ask you to turn on your mics and then share and ask those questions outright. Then, as you notice also at the bottom of the panel, there's a reaction button. So we do encourage you all to sort of use it to encourage our speakers who are sharing. It gives them a little sense of appreciation of what they're sharing and what they're doing today. And if you can use it, it would be really helpful, right? Okay, so after this sessions and the sharing, we will be actually going into breakout rooms if we reach a certain critical mass. If not, then we may keep the numbers here and then we'll do a sort of a round robin for everyone to sort of introduce themselves and then get to know each other a little bit better. I mean, today's virtual world, we don't get to meet people. And because we don't get to meet people, we find we're missing that human touch, right? So we hope that the breakout rooms that we have towards the end of this session allows us, for those of you who can stay back, to meet others and sort of break bread or break some ice with each other over the next half an hour. So we will end officially at 3:30, but the breakout rooms and the sort of the networking is open till 4 o'clock. So we've got another half an hour for everyone to sort of get to know each other a little bit better, right? So I am sort of going to pass on the mic to two of the organizers for today's webinar. The first of which is from ARAIBA, which is Thomas. And Thomas is the president of the ARAIBA, and I will get him to sort of share a little bit about who ARAIBA is, so that you know a little bit of it. For those of you who are not members, please do consider joining. I'm hoping to get a lot more support for it, and if you can, also share it with your friends. Thomas, over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll be talking about ARAIBA, but I also want to thank Boon, Hwee and Mark for coming in. I have a copy of their book. Let me see. I have a copy of their book. Very good. Read it. This is not the first book that they wrote. They have written another one on stewardship, which is also I have. And it is pages of wisdom. I'm not going to talk about what I read, but I like their stories about elephants and real classic examples of companies. So you're going to have a really good session today. For those who have heard my presentation before, introducing ARAIBA, forgive me, but I think it is worth running through quickly on it. So I'm just going to do ARAIBA in the few minutes that I have. Just give me a second. Sorry. Okay, in the few seconds I have, I just want to give a little bit of background, tell you what is it all about, what is it, and the statistics. Okay, this ARAIBA is one of the brainchilds of the ASEAN CSR network, of which I'm the CEO. We were formed to promote responsible business conduct within ASEAN. So in Singapore, we are also an ASEAN entity, and ASEAN has a business advisory group. We are the championing promoting responsible, inclusive business. That's an initiative. So what we did is, together with the ASEAN Business Advisory Council, in a way, we actually tried to get this agenda going by asking the economic ministers of ASEAN to support this initiative. And we basically said that, okay, ASEAN should support. And we came out with some of the issues that we have been talking with ASEAN, some of decent work or migrant worker issue on responsible business, inclusive business, micro, medium, small, medium-sized enterprise development, gender equality, also the ESG and sustainability. These are among those topics we talked. So we asked them that discussion came out that we should develop a code, because there's so many things around what does it really mean in ASEAN. So and also we need to promote this and have research which will promote evidence-based capacity building, training, etc., and also have dialogue focus group. So and also raise money. So what we have done is we've taken it and say we have a code, and we say what does responsible business means? A lot of means with values and principles, and we drafted 7 values which we think everybody should have. And these values are accountability, transparency, ethical behavior, respect for stakeholders, respect for rule of law, respect for international norms of behavior, respect. The treat people with respect and dignity is a more neutral term for the word some people call human rights. But we also what are the subject areas that we need to talk? And I think when you talk about inclusive, we put number 1 is governance. Unless you have good governance, nothing else works. So importance of governance was put up, environmental, labor, anti-corruption, human rights, consumer protection. We say these are some of the core points that we need to look upon. And you'll find that when you will read this code and our other elements, you'll find that there is a lot of synergy and overlap between what Mark and Boon will be talking. So they will also be promoting these concepts and the thing. So I'm not critical of your books, I think, except positively. The other point is that, so in order to do this, we actually create ARAIBA to create this network of companies who believe in this and who want to take this journey. We recognize that nobody can do anything overnight, but it is a journey, but the journey starts somewhere. So the question is, what does we do? So we have agreed on 6 objectives to realize the vision where businesses do well by doing good. That means you can do good and do well at the same time, and also promote responsible business conduct. The word sustainability, inclusivity, and equitability is one of the words the ASEAN uses very often. And this is also very important. Promote a culture of good governance. Because if you don't have governance, nothing else works. And also to share information, experiences we can do, and support businesses, entities, and also to be a connector between the establishment of governments, businesses, and other stakeholders. So we have been doing it at the organizational level, at a network level, through ASEAN CSR. Now we're trying to get individual companies to do it and to move ahead. So those who are members, who are pioneers in this effort. Why is it very important? I think the COVID-19 and aftermath actually tells us it's really important. And I think there's a lot of populism. Some people call it populism, but I use the word pressure from the ground. That the people on the ground want their pressure, their needs to be addressed. And responsible business, CSR, stewardship, recognizes that you are there, you have to look at the needs and expectations of the community, expectations of other stakeholders. So I think governments are reactionary. So you just look a few weeks ago, telling that Malaysian palm oil industry is now looking at local workers and not foreign workers, which means you have to increase wages, improve things. Even Singapore, look at the banks we have been accepting for making money. They're looking at recruitment practices to be changed. Parliamentary debates now talks about things. It's so classic because many years ago when I was in the union, we tell people that we should keep local workers and give them a priorities, and we were told quite bluntly, no, the best worker stays, whether it's local or foreign. And telling the politicians then, my union friends, look here, who votes for you? So you should take care of your voters before you did. Today, they are saying the same thing. So the pressures have changed. And I also want to say that there is global trends. ASEAN businesses are seen, are reported normally in a negative position, whether it is palm oil, whether it's fisheries, slave labor, whether it's in their rubber gloves, electronic industry. We need to change that image. And the pressure will come from the West and the rest of the world, the EU group, Green Deal, the FTAs. And so we are just saying that you can't wait for politicians to take, we should take the motions and take our steps ourselves, and things get moved. So the last month we had Ambassador Ong Kim Yong who launched it and tried to push this agenda. So this month we are happy to hear another Ong around here. So the Ong clan has been quite helpful, and I'm quite happy with them. And what is the current status? We got about 50 plus members and it's growing. Most of them are small industries. We did a survey on members. I think the important thing is they'd like to have the branding to be seen and as responsible and inclusive. They want us to grow the organization, help grow, and also look at funding opportunities and the ASEAN platform, and also as the advocacy for growth. So some of the activities we're doing and will bring up is the webinars, the capacity buildings. We talk about peer learning, we talk about annual, and we're pushing some advocacy. We're also promoting some member-driven projects. One of it is Sunny Chin, who's in the webinar. He's trying to get something to help Manila with their COVID. So I think this is all good initiatives. So I also want to say that the ASEAN Business Advisory Group and others have actually put in a recommendations, 45-page document to ASEAN leaders on what is a pathway for recovery and hope in ASEAN. It's a recovery to this. And in these recommendations, they have clearly said the need for responsible business. They have clearly stated that the private sector should promote responsible business. And they talked about ARAIBA and to promote responsible business. And there was also the need that ASEAN should give us the money and the funds to grow this network. So I'm just saying there's also a recognition. Just this morning, my friends in ASEAN Business Advisory Council has been talking to the political leadership on the recommendations we made, about 200 recommendations on post-COVID, managing COVID and post-COVID promotion. So going forward, we look for companies, more companies. We need to create a multiplier effect. I think we want to change the branding and respond to global regional trends. I think we should not be reactive, we should be proactive. And some of these things would have taken place if we had responsible business where we looked at it. So in our discussions with things which fits in is that these are the 5 areas that some of the other business things that would have been quite important: supply chain, circular economy, sustainable procurement, people with matters, and also business things. So going forward, we hope that we will evolve as a member-driven organization. We can do good, do well, do good together, which means working together, collaboration, and scale up, do more. So the access is this whole lot of things. And responsible business output by saying that it's the end of the day, you build trust, you build respect. And that fits in very much with this book called Entrusted and our whole objectives. So on that note, I would say thank you. And again, thank you, and look forward to a healthy discussion to take this agenda forward. Thank you very much. And thank you for your patience. This is, if you need a bit more information, please get in touch with me, and we can talk later about it. Thank you.
Right, wonderful. Thank you, Thomas, and thank you for that sharing. I now like to sort of pass on the mic over to Alan. Are you there? Okay. So
yes, I am.
So Alan is from Brands for Good, and sort of the other co-organizer for our webinars, and then I wanted to sort of give the airtime now over to Alan to sort of share a little bit about Brands for Good. Alan. Alan. We can't hear you.
Okay, yeah. Trying to figure out how to unmute. Okay, guys, you can see my slides, huh?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and so I'll just take about 3 minutes to introduce what we do at Brands for Good. So as you can see, Brands for Good, it's an initiative not just by by ourselves, but there are quite a few of us working on this together. So on this page you can see, all right, we started off with iPod Society, IIPCC as the main organizers, all right, and then we had Maybank as our sponsor. This year we had 01 as our sponsor as well. And we're glad last November we had a partnership with ASEAN CSR Network, and together now we want to promote and coordinate this CSR space across ASEAN, right? And then together we are building the ARAIBA, the ASEAN Responsible and Inclusive Business Alliance. These are our supporting organizations, right? And the judges who helped us, work on the selection of nominations, to get the Brands for Good award. We are thankful also Prof. Su Guaning, one of our strong supporter, right? He once was telling me after he understood what we are doing at Brands for Good, saying that, if we do this well, Brands for Good really has the chance to, change the world for the better. Okay, so let me share the mandate, all right, or the vision of Brands for Good. We really want to champion the cause, right, to encourage or to inspire every business to become a purposeful brand. All right, because we believe every business can achieve the triple bottom line, not only just to do well financially, to make a profit, but at the same time, in the process of making that profit, right, to impact society, impact the environment in a positive way. All right, so we started this in 2018 and 2019. So we had already recognized 60 over companies, all right, for their business model, for their, for their creative way of arranging the business, to achieve this triple bottom line impact. All right, so we have developed this two coffee table booklet to to share the stories, the success stories of these companies. We also did some YouTube video and a LinkedIn page. So appreciate all your support to go and like and subscribe. Now in 2020, we will be running ASEAN CSR conference instead, right? Because of course, in the wake of COVID, we can't do the conference or the gala dinner like before. And unfortunately, also Invention Convention has just written to us to say they can't do it for 2021 anymore because COVID has also impacted them quite badly. So we're going to do our ASEAN CSR conference on the 10th of December, all right, between ASEAN CSR Network and ourselves and the ARAIBA community. So that's the, award. These are the 5 different criteria or different categories, all right, in business, leadership, capital, design, and technology. So we look at businesses who have been able to, design their, the business model around these areas, right, in a way that is able to achieve that triple bottom line or or creating the impact. So for those who wants to nominate yourself to join us on Brands for Good, that's the link above, in the blue banner above. All right, and then these are the sort of formality, the forms to submit. All right, so that's the timeline towards 10th December now. All right, so we're gonna we have gotten a few organizations who will who has agreed to join us, like Asian Development Bank, FinTech Academy of Singapore, Maybank. So we're gonna do this online conference on the 10th of December. So why join us, right? Number one, I think as a network, I think we believe that this movement or this campaign we can all do together, right? It's not a one person's mission, and so we hope to create this community, right, to deliver impact together, all right. And of course, secondly, also, I think as a network, we can help each other. There are a lot of resources we can share, a lot of new know-how we can share. And that's why we organize webinar like this, all right? And so finally, for those of you who likes to be updated on our activities, all right, so join us in our this WhatsApp group chat. All right, you can download this QR code or the address below to join us in the group chat. Yeah, that's how we keep our or rather we post our updates to everybody. All right, so here are some examples of the the group events that we do, right? Engaging industry leaders. So as you can see, the one above, a delegation that came from Cambodia, all right, and then some of the networking dinner that we do with some of the industry leaders. All right, so these are some of our past winners. All right, and recently we did also a private session with Manpower Minister Josephine Teo, so that our members can engage her directly, with our own questions and all that. So yep, so that's the story of Brands for Good. Do visit us at our website if you have any questions, and looking forward to all your participation. Thank you. Over to you, Glenn.
Right, thanks a lot, Alan. Okay, so thanks, Alan, and thanks, Thomas, for sharing a little bit about ARAIBA and Brands for Good. I am going to sort of go into the next part of the segment, which is slightly before Boon, Hwee's and Mark sharing, which is the photo taking session. So I'd like to sort of invite everyone to sort of turn on your screens and while Shark, if you are there and ready,
Yep. Yep.
Comb your hair too, like Alvin. Yeah, we can see you doing that. So those of you who want to like sharpen yourself, get yourself posted, I would like to also invite everyone to sort of do a thumbs up so that we can get the shot ready. And okay, so Shark, you there?
Yep.
You good?
1, 2, 3. Yep. Thank you so much.
All right. Okay. So thanks everyone for your time today, and I realize, because I haven't hosted this AST for quite a while, so I made the mistake of not introducing what our ASEAN Stronger Together webinars are about. So I'm going to do that right now. This ASEAN Stronger Together webinars is actually a monthly members webinars, right? So we do this as a way to sort of bring our members together and to provide an opportunity for them to grow stronger, right? And hence the topic for today. And while we had the opportunity to get Mr. Ong and Mr. Goyder, did I pronounce that correctly, sir? To share a little bit about what they've been doing, especially in their book with Entrusted. ASEAN Stronger Together is a monthly program, and it's sort of not open to the public. And for those of you who are here today as guests, you're privileged. I do encourage you to sort of join us as well if you can, and have the capacity to. It would be great to have your partnership with us as we sort of journey together. So today, so as we mentioned, you probably will know, we have the privilege to have Mr. Ong and Mr. Goyder. Mr. Ong is actually the former CEO for Stewardship Asia Center, a thought leadership center established under Temasek Trust. He has a diverse experience in executive roles from Singapore Power, Temasek Holdings, Temasek Management Services Group, and is a director on the boards of a number of companies and non-profit organizations. In his previous life, he was a brigadier general. Didn't know that, sir. And led key command and staff positions in the Singapore Armed Forces. And he is also two co-authors for 2 books, Entrusted, together with Mark Goyder, and Inspiring Stewardship, right? Mr. Mark Goyder, I'm so terribly embarrassed. Is an award-winning speaker, writer, and broadcaster with 15 years of experiences. A manager in the manufacturing business, founder of Tomorrow's Company, which is, I think, since I found out, I'm very excited trying to Google it and find out a little bit more about it. For those of you who are in my neck of the woods, we should all try and find out a little bit of what he does. He remains a trustee of Tomorrow's Company, and which works with business leaders, investors, policymakers, partners to inspire and enable business to be a force for good in society. Mark has held advisory roles working with leaders in British Airways, British Telecoms, Camelot, Novo Nordisk, and Walgreens Boots Alliance. He is also the author, together with Mr. Ong, in both their books, right? So today, as we shared a little earlier, it's going to be sort of a conversation style, and I will get Mr. Ong first to sort of share a little bit about his time, and then we'll pass on the mic to Mr. Goyder. Should just use first name. Ong, you're mute.
Yeah, sorry, I was just my timer on into the time. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and it's such a joy to be interacting this way together. And I particularly appreciate Thomas and Alan in the sharing earlier, because it sort of set the stage very well on to what we're going to discuss together. And I mean, it is really obvious to me that from what you have shared regarding your respective organizations, the values that you hold here, I think it resonates very well with what Mark and myself wrote in the book on stewardship, as well as what we will be sharing as well as conversing. And jokingly, I always say that the word resonate means we are vibrating in the same frequency. So I can see that indeed we are vibrating across the air together in the same frequency on the topic like this. And it's such a joy to be in what I call a conversation rather than a webinar, because I've always looked forward to sessions like this that are of this size, of this size, meaning that 5 rows of 5, which is 25 people. The video boxes are in 5, and I think this is a very good setting, especially not only the size but also the composition of people, because I was spending some time looking at what was sent to me just a few minutes ago on the composition of people. And I think we do have people from, yes, diverse industry, but we are generally in business, and also some are in non-profit organizations, and very much interested in this topic of stewardship, or how do you do good, do well together, do right together. So if I may upfront echo what Glenn has mentioned, it is a conversation. So let's make it a conversation. We want to, as quickly as possible, get into a conversation. And I myself and Mark will at best be setting the stage so that we can converse in a more focused way. The other aspect that I want to perhaps lay a challenge of seeing the size and the composition of people is, Glenn, if I may put forward a challenge that within the period that we have, about 40 minutes, 45 minutes or so, let's see whether we could have everybody to have a chance to make a comment or ask a question. And if you have, that will be very good. So jumping into the issue as well, I don't think I will spend any time on relating about the COVID-19 crisis, which of course all of us know that it affected so many people not only in Singapore, but the world, right? I mean, the latest count is about 25 million affected and 200 over countries. But definitely in Singapore, like it or not, we are all part of it. We are very affected. But upfront, I would like to say that actually a crisis like this, particularly relating to the theme of stewardship in disruption or emerging stronger, it is that a crisis like this do not render stewardship irrelevant, but on the contrary, reinforce it. It is actually a very good test. If you take stewardship as what Thomas has mentioned, responsible business and responsible leadership, then it is all about how stewardship can shine through, can even become more relevant, not only in seeing how businesses survive, but how business and organizations emerge stronger at the end. So in that regard, I would just like to share 2 points, and by way of doing that, setting the stage. I think the first point is very much related to the fact that while we are all in the same crisis, sometimes I like to use the phrase, we are in the same storm, but we are certainly not in the same boat. And the difference in how we emerge from the crisis is related to how we respond to the crisis. As I say, life is maybe 10% of what happened to you or happened to all of us, but 90% about how you respond. So the first point I wanted to really hit home is a certain sense of ownership. The businesses that differentiate itself and the organization that differentiates itself, maybe relating to the 2 organizations that we are talking about, ARAIBA and so on, is also how you look at a crisis like this, right? I mean, if you have a victim mentality and you don't take a certain responsibility, do not take the bull by the horn, you're not going to emerge any stronger. You may not even survive the crisis. But if you do take a sense of ownership, as we wrote in the book, you know, ownership is also about taking responsibility, taking charge, taking pride in what you do, taking care of your people, and then to emerge stronger. So I think a big difference will be in the attitude of businesses and so on. And I could go on to cite many, many examples, in particular in the course of my work relating all across Asia, especially family businesses that have survived 100 years, survived many, many crises. It is all about their attitude about taking the bull by the horn. The second point I want to just hit on, and we can discuss further, is all about this word, these two words rather, resilience and agility. You hear this very often. And so what is resilience? It's all about people talking about that you have the defensive mechanism, you are able to have the mental strength to proceed. But if you drill down to the definition of resilience, especially in Asian language, it's very interesting. Resilience is all about bouncing back. In Chinese, we call it fan tan xing. How do you bounce back? It is a physical term. You know, something go out of shape, and then the resilience allow it to spring back to shape, right? So that is the same with business. And related to that is, of course, the term agility. People use agility in a very general sense, but I would like to use agility in the relative agility sense. You know, as I said, we may be in the same storm, but we may not be in the same boat. Another interesting storm quotation, they say a rising storm raises all boats. I think that is correct, but not totally accurate. A rising storm raises all boats, but they do not rise equally. How they rise will depend on their relative agility, their ability to bounce back. And in that regard, I really encourage ARAIBA, and particularly relating to the organization, to see how in a very practical way you can help businesses to look at beyond the crisis into bouncing back, you know, integrating long-term and short-term. I always like to say this, and sometimes in the crisis, it doesn't mean a lot to people, but bad times, just like good times, will not last. It will get by. And that is where the difference will be. And Singapore, make it a virtue of ourselves to always, we're always affected by crisis, economic crisis, but it's how do you bounce back better? So with that, I just want to use that to set the stage, and very much look forward to our conversation. And just to sum up by saying that I think in a crisis like this COVID-19, harnessing stewardship, and by that definition, of course, I don't have the time to go into a long definition of stewardship that is perhaps be much in the book, but stewardship in a nutshell is all about how each of us, entrusted with responsibility, see to it that we can grow something so that we will pass it on to the next guy in better shape. And nothing like a crisis like this makes stewardship even more relevant. So with that, I'm going to pause there, but look forward to a time of learning from all of us in this webinar, and also to perhaps discuss more in the, and as I said, I really encourage you not just to put in a question, but to make a comment and ask a question, because the numbers and the composition allow us to do that. So Alan, I'm going to pause there and hand over to you back, and look forward to the discussion later. It's not Alan, sorry, Glenn.
No worries.
Yeah.
So I think we can sort of dive next over to Mark. Have I been pronouncing it correctly, sir?
Yes, Mark Goyder. He's my twin brother, by the way.
Okay, right. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Ong's twin brother from another mother.
Another continent.
Another continent. Mr. Mark Goyder. Round of applause for.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today, and I wanted to build on what Mr. Ong said. He closed by saying that stewardship is all about we call it the responsible and wholehearted management of entrusted assets so that we pass them on in better condition. And I wanted to reflect on we've learned by many dialogues together. I've been coming to Singapore over 5 years to all the Stewardship Asia Centre dialogues, and the book in many ways is a product of what we've learned from those dialogues. And one of the things that we have learned is stewardship is about three things really. It's characterized by three things. One of them, and I'm going to fail in this, and I'm going to need my twin brother's help because this needs stating in Chinese, but one of them is about the difference between I should and I will. Do you want to just say that for a moment, Boon, Hwee, in the way that we learned that in Chinese?
So for those who are familiar with Chinese, what Mark is referring to is we always say that stewardship is about moving from 要我尽责 to 我要尽责. 尽责 is of course to be responsible instead of 要我 to 我要.
And this is a vital difference because you meet business leaders who have that victim mentality that Mr. Ong was talking about. I can't do this because my shareholders won't let me. I daren't do that because the government won't let me. But speaking with a group of entrepreneurs, you all know that what characterizes the great leader, the essence of a leader, is it's not I should, it's I will. And there are many examples of this. One of the ones that always strikes me in a very big company that has stayed entrepreneurial, Microsoft, years ago. Some of the people from Microsoft went to their boss. They were from the part of Europe which was suffering a terrible civil war and ethnic cleansing and so on. And they said, what's happening in Kosovo is terrible. What's Microsoft going to do about it? And the chief executive in Europe, he didn't turn around and say, go back and design some more software. He said, well, go and have a look at what's happening. And when they came back, they told him that what was happening was many refugees, many people had been driven off across the border into neighboring Macedonia. They couldn't get back. People couldn't find their relatives. And these software engineers came back and said, we've got a database problem and we've designed a piece of software that's going to enable us to connect lost people and give them identity and allow them to come back. And the interesting thing about this humanitarian act was that it's become a piece of software that Microsoft is still selling decades later because it's being used by the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. And so there's this real sense about I will find my place in the world, making a contribution. And I think I was listening earlier to I think it was Jonas who was talking about the human purposes of business. And the second characteristic I wanted to mention about stewardship is we talk about the crisis, but there is also preparedness for the crisis, and the way in which stewardship, the principles of stewardship actually equip people to be prepared for future crises. The current crisis is COVID, but we all know that crises to come, they may involve huge difficulties in migration, in flooding, in climate-related incidents, in social unrest, and so on. And so the ability of a company to be ready for so many different crises, it seems to me, is vital. And the example that strikes me there so strongly is the Tata Group, who, after all, have been around for more than 150 years. But at the essence of the Tata Group is this sense of the human purposes of business. And at crucial times in their history, as we describe in the book, the leaders of the Tata Group have made serious personal sacrifices to put the company and their people first, ahead of their own self-interest. And there was the classic example of that of the way in which their behavior manifested itself in the behavior of some of their youngest employees when the luxury Taj Mahal hotel in Mumbai was attacked by terrorists. And young people recruited less than a year before, but properly trained in the Tata culture, showed personal self-sacrifice in defending their guests, looking after their guests, and putting their lives on the line to save many of those guests. Now, Tata was an example of what I call of the preparedness of stewardship, of the way in which if you build the right culture, if you build a culture in which you put other people first, it's a culture in the end which will serve your own self-interest. And in that issue of preparedness, some of you talk, I can't remember which of you was talking about your own consultancy being one which focuses very much on helping people with clarity. One of the tools we talk about in the book, which I would commend to you, is the tool that we call the board mandate, but you can give it any name you'd like. It's really the importance of any company, however young, answering the question, why are we here? Who's put us here? How do we see our accountability? How do we decide? We talk a lot in the book about dilemmas. What are the principles by which we will make decisions in dilemmas? Will we give in to the short-term pressures of our owners and shareholders, or will we have told our owners and shareholders that we have certain principles, and if you want to invest in us, we're not going to depart from these principles? So for any of you building a young business, I do commend to you the principles and the methods behind the board mandate. Finally, on the question of evidence, we are speaking at a seminar for Brands for Good. Are many of you familiar with the work of an American called Jim Stengel, who wrote a book called Grow? Has anybody come across that? It's fascinating because Jim Stengel was a marketing director of Procter & Gamble, and he set out on a particular piece of research for Procter & Gamble and discovered something which he wasn't intending to investigate, and that was he discovered evidence that companies which put improving people's lives at the center of all they do have outperformed their competitors. He did a study of 50,000 brands, and to quote him, he said, "The unexpected thing was, again and again we found that the world's fastest growing companies were organized around ideals of improving people's lives and activated those ideals throughout their business ecosystems. The top 50 brands had grown 3 times as fast as their competitors, and some had grown 10 times as fast." So I hope this gives encouragement to ARAIBA and Brands for Good. Companies which do put human needs at the heart of what they do in the long term will not only be better prepared to be agile and resilient in the next crisis, they will also outperform their competitors. Back to you, Glenn.
Wonderful, Mark. Okay, so you've heard a little from Mr. Ong and Mr. Goyder, and I sort of want to put the same challenge out, right? So we've got 25 people on screen, 24 people, right? And so we're going to have to, in the minus of 2 speakers, we're going to have 22 questions. So we're going to pose at least to make sure that every single one of us sort of gets a chance to pose a question and take up this challenge that we have. Do I have sort of a volunteer? Does anyone want to start the ball rolling today? And raise, and we're all Singaporeans here. I think most of us are. So I don't think nobody likes going first. If nobody likes going first, with the army style, okay. Right?
Glenn, I can start first.
Okay, yeah, good. So Alan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ong, and thanks, Mark, for your sharing. Maybe my questions is, if I wonder if you all have also some insight about, managing, stewardship, managing, what we are trying to do in at the ASEAN level, because, right, ASEAN, they are they all have different level of, I suppose, business maturity. And so when we say stewardship, right, it may mean slightly different thing. To the developing countries, as maybe those who are a bit further behind, like Cambodia, Laos, and in places like Singapore, Brunei, I don't know, they may see it differently. I don't know, in your own experience, uh, you know, uh, are there different views about these things?
Jamin, Mark?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me go with this question about ASEAN. It is very much part of the last 5 years, especially relating across Asia in general and ASEAN in particular. I think, Alan, that is a wonderful question from an angle that, to start off with, you make a few points. One is that stewardship means different things to different people, and that is absolutely true from the angle that, in fact, Thomas made reference to the three elephants that we wrote about in the preface of the book. And one of the three elephants is the seven blind men touching elephant. It means different things to different people. But what is very interesting, if I may talk about this question from the other angle, that it is not the diversity, but in many ways, across ASEAN, um, this concept of stewardship really resonates, really is very much part and parcel of the ASEAN or Asian, more generally, culture. And just to add a small point to say that um, when I first started this work on stewardship in Stewardship Asia Center, I thought the stewardship concept would be a handicap because there is no language in ASEAN language or Asian language, if you want to widen it, that directly translate the concepts that we want to talk about. In Chinese, you Google stewardship, you will come up with 管家, which is more management, caretaker. But the point that I discovered is exactly this point I wanted to answer your question with, is that all across ASEAN, the concept of stewardship actually is deeply embedded in the culture. And one of the most satisfying part that I found stewardship to be is when we talk about, when we relate to businesses across ASEAN in terms of particularly the ownership part. Of course, there's the other part that is about the management, the value chain approach, and that one a lot to do with governance. But on the ownership part of the side of the value chain, there are two key players in businesses within ASEAN, in Asia in general, but ASEAN even more specifically, family-based business and state-owned. So there are some countries that are more state-owned dominated. Vietnam, for example, state-level enterprise. But the other part is family business. Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines. Philippines very strong on that. And stewardship culture, stewardship concepts resonate absolutely well with them. So I would say that if you want to find, and I was very much involved in ASEAN in my earlier life when I was a civil servant, part of the ASEAN circuit. ASEAN is a very difficult organization to handle. The ASEAN logo, 10 nations coming together, one middle band points out again. The middle band part is very, very difficult. But if you want to look for unifying sort of a concept, I would suggest that actually reaching out to the business with stewardship concepts really can work very well. So whether it's state-owned or family-based business will remain one of the biggest influential, particularly if you look at countries like Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, and this is one of the main niche that I operate, work with, relate to very much during the period. It is really a joy to see how that can become such a integrating sort of inclusive sort of a concept to work with. So it's sorry that it's a little bit long answer because it's particularly hit a very passionate part of the work that I was enjoying doing in Stewardship Asia Center.
Yep.
Mark,
I also have a question for the
Wait.
authors.
hang on, Sharp.
Oh, Mark wants to comment, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I'd just add to that. I mean, what has been so fascinating working with Boon Hwee on Entrusted and with Stewardship Asia over the years has been the understanding, the deeper understanding of the things that the East and the West have in common and the things that are different. One of the things that is different, I believe, is the attitude to time. I once saw in a study that when people in the East were invited to graphically represent time, they expressed it in cyclical or circular terms. Whereas when people in the West were asked to describe time, they expressed it in a line, a straight line. And I think this linear attitude to time has been one of the besetting problems of Western capitalism. And I think one of the things that the East should celebrate is this deep understanding that past, present, and future are all connected. And that is something which we need to bring out.
Yeah. You know, Mark just said something very, it struck me, it triggered one of the interesting debate that two of us had. Mark, when we were writing the book, and it's exactly on this point. I mean, most of the time we are in total agreement, but this particular, you said, Mark, you remember, was the word circle or cycle.
Yes.
Yeah, because we heard of virtuous circle or virtuous cycle. I like the word virtuous cycle. Mark said in English, it should be virtuous circle, right? So what Mark just said just reminded me, because to me, it is a virtuous cycle. It has got an upward and it's got a time element, you don't go around in this way, just like a vicious cycle. Yes, an upward spiral, right? So what Mark, you just said something that is very relevant in the Asian or even put it ASEAN context, and that is how family business that are very long-term surviving, 100 years and so on, they see themselves as this reinforcing cycle, in the timeline. Just to add the point about, I was interacting in Japan, a speaker there for the family business, and I was interacting with a man, an 80-year-old man, who owns a family business that's 1,300 years old, not 130, mind you, 1,300 years old. And some of the concept of time and movement upward do come into play.
Wow. Okay, so I'm a little stunned about this whole idea of time being linear and circular. It's an interesting thought, right, Mark? Okay, so Shah, sorry, you had a question that you sort of wanted to raise.
Yes.
Don't worry, you guys. For those of you who have questions as well, who want to go up next, can I get your hands to sort of raise or pose the question within the chat group? But Shah, go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Glenn. So basically, I was wondering, since traditionally the main objective of business is to grow its profitability. So especially in this COVID crisis and in generally as well, how would you suggest companies, how do they approach the decision-making process at such times when they might have to even make a trade-off between stewardship and profitability? Thank you.
I think Mr. Ong should take this one. He wrote a very good article about it.
Well, I thought Mark would be jumping in on that one. Let me start with it, and then Mark, you can add on it. I think there are many ways to approach this. I will try to keep my answer very short. I think somebody mentioned just now about the work that they're doing. I think whether it's Jonas or Janet, I can't quite remember. I think probably Jonas, about triple bottom line. And I think this relates to this aspect about, profitability, of course, is very important. But when we talk about stewardship, we integrate this other aspect about environment. Minimally, at least you don't damage. But what about positively? One of the key characteristics of or the key approaches that we wanted to put across, Mark and myself, in the book is how do you approach things in a positive way? So my immediate short answer will be that profitability is important, but stewardship is all about beyond profitability. Now, related to another question that I do see on the chat, is this aspect about, and you touch on trade-off, I was very much in the discussion just this morning, and I make a very strong point, maybe perhaps too strongly, on the word trade-off and balance. Mark and myself felt very strongly that stewardship is about an integrated or a process that you see things not in black or white. This is one of the elephant. It's a gray elephant, not the black elephant or the white elephant. But things are a lot to do with gelling, handling dilemmas, and so on. So when you come to profitability is definitely important. But it's also a question of how do you integrate all the other aspects, not in a sense, this is where I was involved in the debate this morning. I particularly felt that the word balance or trade-off sometimes give a very wrong connotation into the angle that you've got to choose between profitability or environment or sustainability or society, so ESG. You have to do all, but with, of course, the focus and the consideration. Just like you cannot say short term or long term. In the COVID-19, you better survive the short term with an eye on the long term, right? So here is where, and we could go into a very long dialogue or discussion on our favorite topic, Mark and myself, on the stewardship view instead of stakeholders' views, instead of shareholders supremacy or primacy. But so that the answer is you really need to gel, and you really need to do things with the concept of putting them together. So when you talk about triple bottom line, it's really a consideration of integrating the orientation for it. That there is really no such thing as a triple bottom line, but it is the attitude and the consideration of what stewardship is all about. So I have kept it at quite conceptual level, but if the discussion so bring it, we could take some examples, but I think I'm going to pause there to let Mark jump in.
Thank you. Absolutely, we make the point very strongly in the book that the companies which have survived for the longer term are those in which the purpose of the business itself comes first, not the people running the business, or not the people working for the business, not the people buying from the business, not the people investing in the business. They're all contributors to the success of the business itself. And that's and then you get the element of time coming in that I think very often it helps to think of these things rather than as a trade-off, think of them as investment in scarce capital. We all know about financial capital, but what about scarce capital? What about trust? What about the human investment that you make in the training of your people? What about the capacity for innovation that you have in your business? If you start thinking in those terms, it's not a case of doing the good versus doing the commercial thing. It's saying, I want to do, as people have said earlier, I want to do both. The question is, I know it's going to pay in the long term. The dilemma comes whether I can afford to retain it in the short term so that it will pay in the long term. But in the end, if you're going to be needing anybody else's help, the key thing is going to earn anybody else's help is their belief that you've got a long term worth fighting for. And that's why I think stewardship is important, because it never loses sight of the link between past, present, and future. And I think the examples I gave earlier demonstrate that. The Tata example and the Microsoft example.
Alan, if I can give a shout out to you on what you said earlier, I thought the brands for good, companies for good is such a good unifying thought. And the particular point about for good, it touches on two aspects. One is for good purpose, and for good meaning long term. So it is brands for good and for good.
Yeah, nice.
What Mark was just referring to.
I think you got it actually. You know, so not many people did, but that's always been our little riddle, right?
No puns, play with words.
Play with words, right? So I like to sort of ask Jonas. You've got a sort of a question posed in the chat, and maybe you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yep, sure. Okay, now it's probably a simple question, but just like to hear from Mr. Ong and Mark. You know, because we talk a lot about this, the businesses, the societies, the corporations and all. Where does the individual come into this? Yeah, because like it or not, right? You know, when we talk about all these entities, they're made up of people, right? And if we are not able to influence the people and the person itself, how do we, then extend that, to the larger entity? So how do we motivate, that individual to want to think more, want to embrace more the principles of stewardship?
Shall I go first on this one, Boon Hwee?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I think I think most of the religions of the world would say that at one and the same level, we're dealing with the individual, we're dealing with the social, the community, and we're dealing somehow, however we like to think of it, with the infinite, with everything that goes beyond those. I think the great weakness that certainly we in the West have suffered is we put these things in compartments. So we put the individual in a different compartment to the community, in a different compartment to the infinite. Well, actually, I think these things are inseparable. And so to Mr. Ong and myself, the idea that the kind of Milton Friedman idea that you can kind of put shareholder value on one side and good things, doing good on the other side, it's irrational, it's unscientific, because it doesn't understand the connectedness between all those things. So coming back to your question, there's abundant research evidence that says that the businesses which have created the most shareholder value over the long term are businesses which have had a purpose beyond profit. They are businesses which have emphasized the importance of relationships, the individual in relationship with both the company, society, the supply chain, and so on. And the businesses which have understood the balance between today and tomorrow. And this is why I think this is why I truly believe that the stewardship thinking is absolutely essential if we're going to recover a kind of capitalism that the public can feel they trust. The Edelman Trust Monitor, which we quote in the book, is showing that people around the world are saying that the system doesn't work for me. I feel disconnected from the system. Actually, business is the way, almost more than any other way, in which people can and should feel connected with the system. And it's this compartmentalized thinking that gets in the way. So we need business leaders who are constantly saying, even when I'm talking about we need to, our shareholders need a return, let's remind people that when we say our shareholders need a return, there are actually human beings somewhere behind that apparently impersonal thing called a shareholder. So I just think every aspect of our dialogue about business needs to be broken back down to the level of the individual human being and then built back up from that through the idea of the company as a collection of human beings. I mean, the Latin cum panis, the people with whom we share our bread, and then right up to the society, which actually feeds us with the civil foundations, the legal foundations, the educational foundations, the social foundations, without which business would be impossible. So I think it's emphasizing our humanity and our interconnectedness in every statement that a manager makes, which it seems to me is how you answer your question.
Well, just to jump in to add very briefly, I think the question that was asked, Jonas, is really indicative that you got it, you know, from particularly from an Asian perspective, that like it or not, the personal motivation is key, right? You see, the definition that I gave earlier, stewardship is all about, you know, and that's an applicative sort of a definition, not the definition conceptually. It is all about how each of us, when entrusted with assets or responsibility, see to it that we grow during our watch, during our tour, during our responsibility over it, such that we are able to hand over what we receive to the next guy in better shape. So if you put that, it is a very personal motivation and very personal responsibility. And the way that good business leaders look at it, they always understand this intuitively as well as emphasize it. They may speak a lot about organization, but you know, of course, most of us might have heard of the company called Haier, H-A-I-E-R, from China, right? I had a more than 1 hour interaction with him in Shantung. And one of the interesting things that, and he comes from a state-owned, original thing, state-owned, and he's from China, you know, his background is state-owned, right? But I think his biggest concept, his biggest achievement, I would say, is the way that he can motivate every one of his employee in Haier, so that within 30 years, they move from a very poor standard companies to a company that can buy certain part of Panasonic, certain part of GE, that company. And the big emphasis is how he motivates each of his employees to have a personal sort of empowerment. So we have lots of discussion on that, and I went home with the point that, oh, stewardship is really how you can, while you have organization institutionalized, passing on from generation and so on, how you motivate each individual, and especially the leader's own motivation.
Thank you, Mr. Ong. Next up, we have got Janet. Janet, you have a question. Maybe you would like to unmute yourself and sort of ask.
Well, actually, mine is more like a follow-up question to check my own understanding. To me, apparently, the idea of stewardship has a very strong oriental value or lens in it, right? So what comes to my mind when Mr. Ong and Mark talks about stewardship really is about you know, the passing on of the essence, right, of the memory, even the DNA, the memory, and passing it on, and there's this accumulation over time. So I guess I would even quote Lee Kuan Yew's words. You know, he was mentioning that each of us, human has a very short memory. In fact, when we are born, each individual of us, we start with a clean slate. We don't remember. We don't have that part. So perhaps the stewardship is also that very special, be it a person or system that injects the software so that the civilization goes on. So organization as civilization, and it is really about existentialship or longevity. I don't know what is the best word to go for it. So would that be a correct understanding of your flavor of stewardship as leadership, as a leader?
May I jump in and then you build on it?
Please do.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what you said, Janet, and really there is not much to elaborate on further, except to maybe reinforce one or two of the things that you mentioned. I wanted to say that stewardship as a concept, which I said earlier, that it resonates very well with Asian culture. As I might have alluded to, it is very much embedded in cultural values. One of the ways that I share stewardship across Asia and across ASEAN is to start off with by using ASEAN, the respective countries' proverbs, stories, saying, I always have a practice of putting a whiteboard in the front where I'm speaking. I say, when I'm sharing about stewardship concept, if you do come across certain ideas or your proverbs, 饮水思源, or Filipino proverb, please come down and just write it and we can discuss it. But I wanted to say that actually stewardship is definitely not a monopoly of Asian culture. In fact, one of the first persons that I learned a lot about stewardship is my twin brother. 5 years ago when we were meeting in the first date in Thai restaurant in London, we were discussing about the universal concepts, and another region that I learned a lot about stewardship, really, they may not call it by the same name, are the Scandinavian countries, a sense of ownership. They call it by different names, but their business are 100 years old and so on. So that is very relevant. But I just can't help but want to reinforce another point that you mentioned about Lee Kuan Yew. You're absolutely right, and I think Lee Kuan Yew touched on many points. He really understands stewardship, maybe not using the word totally, but intuitively. And in the book, Inspiring Stewardship, the first book that I have written, co-write, I wrote 3 pages on Lee Kuan Yew. It was during the time of his funeral. I was watching TV and tapping, maybe lump in the throat and tear in the eye. And so I wrote this. I put, if stewardship is all about growing something and handing over in better shape, what I just cited, then Lee Kuan Yew, by that definition, is a steward leader par excellence, because he takes over a Singapore and he hands over a Singapore in far better shape, and he institutionalized a lot of the values. So what you just said really resonates with me absolutely about the way Lee Kuan Yew has taken leadership and personalized it, but what is remembered for is institutionalize it, and the handiwork is in the outcome, the impact that he can leave behind. So longevity is definitely correct as well.
No, I thought I just wanted to point out that because the co-authorship is also between Mr. Ong and Mark, right? And what is really interesting is the Chinese have a very good, a long sense of longevity, but it's typically from the Western part of the world that they institutionalize or professionalize it. For example, we know of family businesses like Cargill or even LV, right? So they went from family, but they are very systematic about things, and they were able to go on for so many years, whereas a lot of Chinese businesses couldn't go beyond 3 generations.
But you see the way the difference may be in the way that it's institutionalized. So the Western businesses in general has very much been going on the, and more and more companies are publicly listed companies, shareholders are more fragmented and things like this. So there are more and more codes, governance codes and so on, stewardship codes that are sort of putting, but the family business in Asia remains very much passing on values, not as codified, but it is still the stewardship passing on. And it's fascinating you know, to see some of the successful family business out there. I have a, you know, the Thomas, whom I remember this guy called Harold Ling in the Stewardship Asia Roundtable. Mark definitely remember, not Harold Ling per se, but Harold Ling and his other partners called Vikram. Vikram, these two are millionaires in Thailand. Harold Ling is a Thai. He's a Swiss, fifth generation Thai. But Vikram is a very interesting character. And he was telling me, in his family business, a standard family, from 5 to 6 years old, they let the young ones come in when they're having their board meeting and to play around and interact, and over time try to bring home values to them. So that is the way of longevity, of you know, sharing across. And I think that is also the reason why they are under tremendous challenge, because as the world change, family business values are under tremendous pressure. You talk to Japan, India, Korea, this is one big issue.
Yes, I think it's right to understand that companies, enterprises, they're not only financial and economic institutions, they're social institutions. Every society is only as good as its social institutions' ability to transmit values, to pass them on, and companies are actually a very important part of that. And certainly in the West, we've lost sight of that. I thought it was interesting, Janet, you talked about Chinese companies not lasting beyond 3 generations, because of course the contrast, which as Mr. Ong's already mentioned, with some Japanese companies is quite striking. I mean, in the book we talk about there are over 20,000 companies in Japan which are over 100 years old. There are 30 which have thrived for 500 years, and there are 5 which have gone on for over 1,000 years. So it's interesting to push back and ask you, Janet, why do you think that's more true in Japan than it's true in China?
Well, I would start with a caveat. It's just my own opinion. It does not represent China or Chinese or Japanese. I think in a way, the Japanese are very obstinate about and very proud as well of exactly that piece you mentioned, the social element, the cultural elements. You know, we are always, everything has two sides, right? So anything that's anything that's overdone is overdrive. So you can see that Japanese lost out in innovation these days, but they are definitely true to their the social elements. If I may, that's what I thought. And to that, right, so in a sense, they're very proud, even with the ramen they are able to make. They make sure that the same recipe, you know, they carry it throughout the generations. I think for Chinese, I speak for overseas Chinese, right? In a way, I think we are affected by the Chinese revolution, because the migration comes from the era as well. And I mean, if I may even say that we kind of lost a lot of culture or civilization elements in us during that period of time. So it is no wonder. In fact, the overseas Chinese are better at you know, passing on the culture aspect. But at the end of the day, you're right to say that we do not. After a while, we lost sight of the values or the social elements. So I thought maybe that's the reason why. And for a lot of us, we are now very Western cultured. So we do, and the same goes on in mainland China as well. So I don't know whether this is the right answer, but this is my guess. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to hearing more of the answer in your book.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Janet. And okay, so now sort of I have the floor open. I haven't seen anyone posting. So we're going to do this military style. So I point and then your answer or ask a question, right?
Right.
So if you've got a general. Oh, okay, Thomas, since you.
Well, I just trying to ask you this, selling these concepts of stewardship. I completely agree with you. I just want to ask you, how successful are we in getting companies to adopt these principles of stewardship in word and in action? The UK and others have got codes on stewardship, which can drive. So how are they? Okay. And with the question, I also want to just give you a little bit of views of why Japanese companies last very long. I think one of the points is if you look at Japanese human resource management systems, and their capitalism is very community-based. It's taking care of people in the community. So the longest companies will last for a very long time. So they talk about lifelong employment, which is also under challenge now. And seniority-based, people progression where you move to another advisory role. And if you look at Taiwan, for example, the old Kuomintang, they have also some of these values. Because you see these old generals are never pushed away, but given different roles, where younger people can still take over the role and be active, but give them the respect. And this is also came out one of Kishore Marubani's article that you look at the poorest people, Japanese economy was not doing well. It was not. But if you look at poverty levels in Japan compared to the US has got terrible problem with the bottom 40%. They never had wage rises for the things. But if you go to Japan, even if the economy is not doing, the poverty levels of absolute poverty and those lines, people at the lower income is still well taken care of. So the value system is there. So that's also part of stewardship that everybody prosper together and we suffer the pain together. So I think that's big difference between the 1% having 99% of the wealth business. So my question on Singapore and others is, how are we faring in terms of things, and how is the Temasek companies doing well on this as well?
Boon, Hwee, do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
Let me have a go at it. There are so many angles. So the and Thomas obviously is a very good thinker. So
sorry, I'm just saying this because I'm also quite keen to know what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, I will candidly just jump in on sharing some personal views on what works and what may not be seem to be as working very well. But I think there are a combination of maybe a few things here. So I could let me just name one or two. One is I think a lot of codifying or passing on or putting into charter or values and things like this. I think people miss out, unfortunately, the point about what are values that holds dear that you should try to, pass it on in one way or another, and what are the methodology that they are not sacrosanct, So if you get these two sort of conflicted, it becomes very complicated. So sometimes you look at Japanese society, you say they are not changing, but at the same time they are actually changing, but they are able to hold on to some values. But indeed, some are not changing fast enough. So in the light of that that point, I just want to say that I have a number of conversations, very, very enriching conversation, very enlightening even to myself. But over time, I ask some of these questions and it sort of trigger off a good conversation. And one of the questions that I always ask family business is, do you strive to be a family business or do you strive to be a business family? It makes a lot of difference because people who want to die, it's English, die, Mark, you may not understand this word, die, hang on to this industry, this business, even though, or the way of doing things, then I don't think that is good stewardship either, right? But if you evolve and the best of business who are able to hold on to the values, evolve the how. Sometimes they even sell the entire business and they become business owners, they become investors. And that is happening very fast in Japan as well, And this tradition about making sure that you keep within the family or keep within the family meals, man only, it's also changing very fast. In the Japanese family business, if they don't have a son, the daughter must quickly go and get married because only the son-in-law can take over the business. And that's ridiculous, right? I mean, so there are a lot of, but so the point I wanted to make is, what do you keep and what do you change? And this is also very relevant in the realm of leadership. Mark Goyder will remember, he invited me to speak at one of his leadership forum, and I was a third speaker. And the second speaker was running down on leadership, on everything that is wrong with in a disruptive world. All leadership are different. In fact, the topic then was Lee Kuan Yew and Winston Churchill. What the leadership of Lee Kuan Yew and Winston Churchill in the 21st century. And this gentleman before me was running down everything. But the fact that I wanted to put across was there are certain, the why and the what of leadership remains, but the how can change a lot. The same for family business. Just one additional comment is in the process of trying to have longevity, sometimes people forget that it is really in wanting to ensure that this business is related to the first point, without having to put pressure on yourself to the point that you become a burden. So just to add the point that Mark mentioned about in Asian context, we say that wealth do not last 3 generations. I don't know whether any of you, I was trying to look at the names, what are the family business here, are in the 2nd generation. That generation, I think they stress themselves to death. Likewise, in the Western world, they have shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve in 3 generations, right? It's the same meaning. So whether it's country or whether it is in the family business, the 2nd generations are the most pressurized. I can tell you that is the fact in my very scientific survey, talking to many people, not scientific, and a doctor. I tell you the 2nd generation are under tremendous trouble because they put themselves into pressure. They are the one that, just imagine your 2nd generation leader, you were under the Lee Kuan Yew generation. Then you know that the next generation, family business in particular, the next generation are the people that they train or the descendants. And they put themselves, say, if the business can collapse, although it dies in the hand of the 3rd generation, I am responsible. In that style of situation, they lose their perspective. They therefore want to either one or two extremes. One is to entrench things that are traditional. This is the way to do things, fossilized, you cannot change. And that causes tremendous problem to this generation. They do not allow the agility part. Or they say, let's give up. Wealth do not last 3 generations, no point trying, let it be. Just sell the wine and distribute to everybody. Either way, it's definitely not the best stewardship of things. So I mean, there are a lot more that we can talk about it, but back to Thomas, your point. I think you have thought quite deeply about some of this topic, and I agree with many of the points that you're mentioning. And I think these points that you talk about and what I alluded to is just as applicable if you look at the lifespan of countries, whether it is Kuomintang and so on that you mentioned and so on. I think there is this very big pressure about leaders trying to make sure that they retain the longevity. Most importantly, they should try to retain what are things that you should hold here and let the how be able to change. This is one Chinese phrase that I always like to communicate using. So my apology to those who may not understand it in the full flavor of it. 通情达理, 通情达理. 通情 come before 达理, right? 情 is to do with the heart, So 通情 is about connecting with the heart. Before 达理, connecting with the head, the intellect. So if you want to talk about longevity, passing down things, you should think about how do you communicate with the heart first, the hardware. And of course, the dali, codifying it, corporate governance are important. But stewardship is about 通情 before dali. That's why the word director is about dali, right? And so on. But actually, director is also about how do you communicate 通情? We can go a long discussion of this, but yeah, Mark, sorry.
Yes, I just wanted to build on this Thomas, you asked about I'm interested in, you said, I'm interested in what's working and what's not working. I think as Boon Hwee's answer suggests, we have a big difficulty in the transition between generations in businesses, the transitions of ownership. I mean, we often take a kind of snapshot view of a business. We say, oh, look at that business today. That's a good business. It's a promising business, or it's not. What we very often don't do is think about the whole life cycle of businesses. And I've seen so many examples of entrepreneur founder remorse. People who have started a successful business, and then all the advisors flock around them and they say, what you need to do is you need to have a listing, or you need to bring in this private equity owner, and so on. And the spirit and the stewardship spirit of that business can be lost in the transactional approach which those advisors introduce. I'm actually talking to a business at the moment which has got a fantastic business idea, which has got huge implications for good in terms of the climate. And I asked, and the founder of this business was introduced to me because it was thought that I might be able to introduce him to some potential funders. And the question I asked him, which he had no answer to, was, have you thought about the ownership of your business that you would ideally like to see in 5, 10, or 15 years' time? And he thought, gosh, no. I mean, I'm just interested in my business idea. I know it's a great business idea. I need to get somebody to fund it. And he hadn't thought about how his purposes could in 15 years' time be completely lost or hijacked because he hadn't kept control or created a governance and an ownership environment that kept control, that aligned things to his original purpose. So when you said at the beginning, Thomas, about governance is preeminent, it's a cornerstone of everything. I would add to that, yes, governance and stewardship, governance and ownership, because so often what you see is that you see people with good intentions, but they've lost control of the ownership, so that they can no longer fulfill those good intentions. I think it's a very important issue, and one of the things I admire about an organization in Singapore like Temasek is the way in which it exercises continuing long-term ownership, not 100% control, but the kind of influence that in the case of companies a few years ago like Olam mean that the original purpose of the business cannot be hijacked by some US pirate.
Right. Thank you, Mark. I'm sort of mindful of the time, 3:40 now. So if with everyone's permission and if we are sort of having a good conversation going, I won't go into the breakout sessions if you guys are perfectly okay with it, and we can sort of use the remaining 20 minutes of the time to continue this conversation, since we're sort of having a little bit of fun, I think, or sort of enjoying this moment. If everyone is sort of okay with that, I like to sort of Sunny sort of PM me and say that he also has a question and he would like to raise. So I pass on the mic over to Sunny. For those of you who have to go, apologies. Don't worry about it. Just let us know, and then drop off. We will try and catch up with you again on another day. But Mr. Ong and Mark, you are okay with staying on for the next 20 more minutes and keep this going? All right. Okay. So wonderful. Sunny, sorry, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, gentlemen, Mr. Ong and Mr. Mark. I just have a very simple question concerning stewardship. How does the stewardship encourage inclusiveness in our society and in our government policies, if there is ever one?
I see Mr. Ong pointing at you, Mark.
Mark's favorite.
Okay.
Mark's favorite.
Mark's specialty.
I'll have a go. How does stewardship? Let me just make sure I've understood the question first of all. How does stewardship encourage
Inclusiveness.
Sorry?
Inclusiveness.
Inclusiveness. Yeah, in our society and in our government. Have I got the question right? Yeah. We have a chapter in the book on the role of the state as steward, starting with the government end of this, and I think it's a very important part of the total picture. If you think about the principles of stewardship, and Mr. Ong's talked about that in the context of Lee Kuan Yew and so on, the idea that it is the responsibility of a government, a local government, a central government, to pass things on in better condition is a very powerful idea, and I think it's one which democracy in the age of populism has been in danger of losing. But to bring it back to, if you like, our span of control rather than our span of influence, it seems to me that businesses have an extraordinarily powerful part to play in promoting that inclusivity. I mean, if we take an issue like climate, we are in an age where governments, we don't have a global government. Governments are really less able than they were 10 years ago to work together in an international, in a global context to say, you know, let's set some rules about carbon, about climate. Sonny, I was involved with Tomorrow's Company in producing a report in 2007, which you can still see, which is called Tomorrow's Global Company. And it was very much about how does the global company of tomorrow promote inclusivity in the world. And it was making the point that we have this vacuum, this global governance vacuum that needs to be filled by intelligent, outward-looking global companies taking action themselves, working with civil society, working with NGOs, with trade unions around the world to set the frameworks within things like the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative was an example at the time. That was in the optimistic days of 2007. It seems to me that, if I look at that report again today, I agree with what it said, but it seems so unrealistic to a world in which some of the major powers are making enemies of each other. And in that world, I think that the role of intelligent businesses in saying, whatever our governments are doing, we are going to continue to reach out. We are going to, as far as possible, to do what some in the oil industry, extractive industries are doing to say we have a responsibility to tackle climate, or take palm oil or an issue like that. We have a responsibility together to set higher standards and properly monitor those higher standards. I think in the next 10 years, it's going to be even more important, because I see this worrying governmental vacuum as our sort of global governance seems to be going backwards. Am I being too pessimistic?
You want me to answer that?
I'm saying it to the room. I think you or anybody in the room, or indeed back to Sonny. I mean, Sonny? Am I being too pessimistic?
I worry.
I just want to share my thoughts. I have been living out in another country that is known as Philippines for the last 8 years. It's not too long, but I have gone through different government and different leaders of the country. So stewardship has not been a very flavor subject of this country policies or government politically, because they are family business. The politics in the country is a family business, you know.
Family business. Yeah,
So when they come when they come online to become the leaders of the country, they undo almost everything that the previous government or the leader has done, and they start their own empire again. And so because of that, there is a very little continuity in what has been built that is valuable to the country, to the people. But that would be very, very worrying, all right, to investors, including myself. And policy doesn't really favor. Today, we are not sure whether how long the policy will work. We always say, while he is still around, better get it done quickly.
Yeah.
And that's it.
But it's interesting. In the book, we give the example of one of the earliest examples in the book we give is of a Philippine company, the Ayala Corporation, which has survived a very long time through those changing political environments, and has, it seems to me, embedded itself in the needs of society in many ways. And I think it's a good example of how even against the most tough, unforgiving governmental contexts, there is a role for a well-founded business to contribute to inclusivity.
If I may jump in there, Sunny, I absolutely I understand what you were saying about the Philippines, and over the last 1 month when we were dealing with this COVID-19 situation, I have the opportunity of discussing across Asia to forge collaboration, connecting the dots. And one of the impressions that I've got is very much related to what you just said, that the Filipino businesses are feeling very pessimistic. And I dare say among all generally the ASEAN family business, the good stewarded, well stewarded companies, they actually contribute a lot. They are very proactive. They're also very much contributing to society, particularly in the COVID-19 situation. And I would say Philippines represent one of those because of gaps and lack. They are the one that's really stepping up a lot. But some of the issues that the impression that I get relates to very much what you said. And it sort of also indirectly relate to this point about inclusiveness. If I may approach it very candidly from another angle, Mark and myself, in fact, included inclusive approach in our first chapter of the book and wrote quite a fair bit about that. But more and more, I'm beginning to put inclusive into one of this bucket of words that says one thing but mean a different thing to people. And very often the inclusive part has become hijacked to mean you must include, and therefore it's a very big tent. And related to that is this aspect is politically correct, So in the name of inclusiveness, there are sometimes the other way around, exclusiveness, excluding is a reverse, sometimes it's a reverse discrimination. That means, so many society use the word inclusiveness. I mean, whether it is minority, whether it is, the certain underprivileged society. Of course, inclusiveness means all that. Inclusiveness also means meritocracy, right? But in the name of inclusiveness, sometimes it can be hijacked to do a lot of other implications. So it is now one of those words that I'm particularly careful about, including this word that you hear very often, the new normal. What does it mean? I mean, you put anything you want in the new normal after COVID-19. So back to the inclusiveness, I wanted to just highlight two words. I saw your question in the chat room, and I sort of wrote down two words. I just mentioned them without the chance to elaborate too much on it. I think one is this thing about rights versus responsibility. When we talk about inclusiveness, we should highlight that when we put certain parties or all parties to be inclusive in it, we must also emphasize not trying to be inclusive because of giving them certain rights. Because each society, each component want to ask for their rights. Turn it around to say, you want to be included. Are you driven by a sense of responsibility? And I think that is absolutely important. If it's all about me, rights, I want to be politically correct, you must include me. What about my responsibility into it? Ask not what the country can do for you, but ask what you can do for the country. Ask not what the company can do for you, but what you can do for the company, right? So if you talk about even in the stakeholders theory, trying to balance customer, supplier, employees, are you only talking about the employees or customers and so on, their rights? The customers' rights. But turn it around, their responsibility. And just how I mentioned, hire Zhang Ruiming, right? I think his biggest achievement is turn it around to say, where do you want to be well treated by the company, you want to be given the correct benefits, that is to be looking after you. But what is your sense of responsibility? So the big word that I felt when you come to inclusiveness has got to be this aspect about how do you emphasize a sense of responsibility. And then the second word is the word that was discussed earlier, I. What do I, not responsibility as a collective, but I think if the inclusiveness has got these two words, I think it will go a long way. So back to just as an illustration, when we talk about, one thing to make sure that inclusiveness means giving meritocracy, looking after our underprivileged. What about also having this aspect about the responsibility of making sure that people who can go as far as they can go is also given the opportunity. So when I was in Singapore Power, my favorite point to everybody is we strive to be organizations not to leave anybody behind, because that's inclusiveness. But we also strive to be organization, not only to do that, but we also want to be organization that holds no one back. So if you can gel it together, that is inclusiveness, not just to be politically correct. You will hear this word very often.
If I were to ask for some advice, as I'm actually mounting COVID-19, a Manila COVID-19 mission. In fact, I just launched it after Ambassador Ong Keng Yong spoke about COVID in ASEAN. And this is going to be a multi-million-dollar mission. It is purely a business alliance initiative. It's not charity, neither is it an NGO outfit. But going down to the Philippines, and we have this concern about not just about inclusivity, but also the stewardship of the city government, because we are very focused in the capital city. Our objective is to help the local situation to contain the COVID and to provide the sustainable solution to restart the economy in the slum or in the city of the three. In fact, we start from 3 cities, start taking some advice from the advisors and also from Ambassador Ong. So what advice you think can such a landscape or country like that, where you know that today's policies is because I'm the rule, but tomorrow, okay, it may change, because we are going to build something sustainable. And of course, with the country, okay, ruler today have another 2 more years to go before he really had to step down. So what do you think? Because it is sizable amount of commitment. Partly, okay, we call supply. The other part is called private public partnership in building up the cities with low cost housing to build infrastructures for economic achievement. So, gentlemen, any advice?
Yeah, sorry, Mark, go ahead.
My advice, with due humility, being ignorant of all the circumstances, but from my own experience in different contexts, would be to say the more you can mobilize the local energy of very, very small community networks to be the basis of what is being done, the stronger the initiative will be and the more lasting it will be. Certainly in the UK, I'm involved in efforts to promote a better approach to health, in which the absolute key, to trust neighborhood councils, to trust neighborhood community groups, to trust specialist self-help groups to be part of the solution and to empower them to be part of the solution, rather than I'm from the government, I've got a solution for you. But I'm sure you know that anyway.
But just two quick points, very down to earth on because I've been involved in many of these projects, whether it's from government angle or helping tsunami from Temasek angle and so on. But just very quick point, it's probably self-explanatory. I think if you are looking for the projects that you are going to be involved in, and also at the back of your mind, you definitely are thinking about the governance aspect. And I even you did not articulate in clear, I can sense the motivation for your questions. I will say there are two aspects that you may want to look out for when you're looking for the projects and structuring the governance aspect of it. I think one is back to the point that I mentioned earlier, ownership. If you are trying to bring together a multi-million project and to help a certain community, and it is particularly to help, let's say the Philippine context, where you can try to structure in a partnership where there is a co-sharing, no matter how disproportionate the amount, to make sure that there's skin on the game on the other side. That's why in the tsunami situation, I wanted to make sure that we, at that time I was working from the Temasek angle, we went out to the ground. So it was structured together with Red Cross, the Singapore government, and we go in to help Bandai Aceh and Melabu, aspect. So, but the co-ownership is the local community, the local government. You've got to bring them into the table, and now it can be the local community, local business, and so on. But if it's a government-related project, there's got to be certain sense of ownership. The other aspect is in the choice of project, where you should look for enabling capabilities. A little bit on the long term. I mean, back to, let's say, the tsunami. I jumped in on 29 December to travel to ground zero, and there were a lot of needs. Red Cross was receiving a lot of contribution and so on. But where the budget that I was operating with, we decided that we will help where we can in the immediate relief. In crisis operation, there's always relief. Then there is recovery and there's reconstruction. Where you can apply best is to put your resources into enabling capabilities. I mean the simple term about don't give person a fish, but teach them how to fish, right? If you can think along that line, or facilities or infrastructure that enable, not immediately expended away and consumed within the relief. So enabling capability with a view for long term, I think will go. It will be meaningful on your project. So
Yeah, thank you for that. Actually,
okay. I'm sort of mindful that it's 4 p.m. as well.
Yep.
So I would like to sort of say last question. I know there are lots of conversation going on, and I also want to sort of keep everyone's time here and to end off. So, Sunny.
Sorry. I think what Mr. Ong has advised is exactly what we are doing right now, the plan. We provide the infrastructures that enable the local community in the slum to learn the rope of doing the city farming. And the city farming can be self-sufficient, and it can also be providing to the cities, okay, with a net output. And there is about something like 3 cities, 1,500 low-cost housing in 3 different clusters. And obviously, it will be something that will be driven by a congressman, which is my partner, and of course, going out towards the 3 city mayor, and the 3 city mayor would then have to endorse it and support it in the PPP, the private public partnership program, meaning to say the people are taught how to own their low cost housing when they're given an opportunity to earn a living through new skill in the city farming, because it's the aquaponics farming, and in return they have the chance to earn a good living much better than they are in the slum. And because we build a sustainable isolation, or we call the living habitat, so that we can contain the COVID, and in return they would then pay back to the government, and the government give us an assurance that whatever that we have invested, okay, will come back to our stakeholders. This is the model. I believe after I hear from you, at least, okay, you ensure that, okay, I'm not going in the different way, but in a way that, okay, you are recommending. So thank you very much, gentlemen.
Congratulations, my salute to you.
Thank you, okay, Mr. Ong, and also for Mark.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so last but not least, I like to sort of take the time to thank Mark and Mr. Ong and Mr. Goyder for being here today, and then for everyone to sort of be a part of our sharing. The last thing that I sort of want to send out a signal is that tomorrow we will be having a sort of a launch for the ARAIBA Malaysia chapter. Right, and of course we have our partner Mushida here today. Oh, she stepped up. I think she stepped away already. So Mushida is actually going to host our inaugural Malaysia ARAIBA event. And for those of you who have business interests in Malaysia, I hope that you'll be able to share the event. We've posted the image, the poster, and the link onto the chat as well. And for you to do to sort of pick it up, if you get a chance, I hope you can join us. It's tomorrow at 2 p.m. as well. Is it at 2 p.m. sharp? Oh, sorry.
3.
It's at 3 p.m. right? Sorry. So it's tomorrow at 3 p.m. on Zoom as well. And if you have, I hope that you will be able to join us. And this is sort of open to public and open to anyone to see as well. Right. So thank you all for your time. Thank you once again, Mr. Ong. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Thomas and Alan for having.
Yeah, Glenn, Thomas has something to say as well.
Oh,
I just want to say thank you very much. And it's like old memories for me, because when I was in Singapore Compact for CSR, my first conference that I organized as Singapore Compact was 2009. Mark was a speaker then, and from Tomorrow's Company. And I'm so glad that I actually met Boon. I think it was in 2 years later when you were talking to Mark. And then I was there when Stewardship Asia started. So it's a whole huge cycle now. And I just say it's wonderful to see that after more than 10, 11 years, we are still going strong and stronger. And I just want to wish you success in things. And I think we should carry on continuing the relationship. I also want to thank all the people who asked the questions and the discussions, and for you for enabling this fantastic conversation. You're so useful. And the fact that we spent 2 hours and had to be forced to stop is a good sign. Thank you very much. Have a safe and healthy, take care.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate the conversation. Thomas, send my regards to Wong King Yong as well.
Sure.
Right.
Thank you.
Your own clangs, huh?
thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Good night. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.